There's a shift of focus in Leah's heart, and this is so important. Leah's circumstances haven't changed. Her husband hasn't changed. He's still the same way. And her circumstances are very, very difficult. I don't want to minimize the situation that she's in. But Leah at this point, listen, Leah at this point chose to focus on the blessings in her life instead of the disappointments. By the time she has her fourth child, she's focused on God and not her husband. She no longer is trying to change her husband. She's no longer experiencing disappointment after disappointment because he won't change. She's focused on the Lord, and she can just enjoy the blessings of the Lord in her life. We can focus on the disappointments, or we can choose to focus on the blessings. And she shifts now. And we can allow the disappointments in life to define us, or we can allow our relationship with the Lord to define us. Where that now becomes the focus, and we can just praise the Lord for the blessings. I love what Habakkuk the prophet says in Habakkuk chapter 3. Listen to what he says. He says, though the fig tree may not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields yield no fruit, though the flock may be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. There's a lot of reasons for Habakkuk to be disappointed with the way things are going, but instead, he says, I'm just going to rejoice in the Lord. Instead of complaining about no blossoms on the fig tree, no fruit on the vines, and no food in the field, no flock. I could complain about that. I could focus on that. But instead, I'm just going to choose to rejoice in the Lord. It's just a choice. It's a choice. I'm going to choose to focus on the Lord. And that's what Leah does here. She gets to the point now, fourth child, where she just praises the Lord. Praise the Lord. He's given me another son. He's blessed me. So verse 1 of chapter 30. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, give me children or else I die. Rachel wasn't happy for her sister, as you might expect her to be. She envied her sister. You know, the Bible tells us envy is a work of the flesh. Envy is a mark of carnality. Proverbs 14:30 says, envy rots your bones. It eats away at you. And Rachel goes to her husband and says, give me children or else I die. Now, ironically, Rachel will die in childbirth in chapter 35. The thing she wants so desperately, motivated by her envy, will be the thing that kills her ultimately. Verse 2, and Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel and said, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Jacob responds to his wife in anger. He speaks harshly to her and says basically, your issue's with God, not with me. You know, Jacob's able to have children with Leah. and he has this harsh answer for his wife. You know, husbands, 1 Peter chapter 3 says to us as husbands, it tells us to dwell with our wives with understanding. To just understand how they are. And Jacob is not being understanding of his wife. His wife is emotional, right? And he responds with anger and harsh, unloving words. Colossians 3:19 says to husbands, husbands, love your wives and never treat them harshly. Never treat them harshly. And husbands, when you do treat your wife harshly, ask her for forgiveness. Be quick to ask for forgiveness. So he's got this harsh answer. And so verse 3, Rachel said, here is my maid Bilhah, go in to her, and she will bear a child on my knees, that I also may have children by her. We saw a similar thing back with Sarah and Abraham and Hagar. This was a common practice in the ancient world. If a wife was unable to bear children, she would provide a surrogate for her husband. In some marriage arrangements, it was part of the marriage arrangement. Archaeologists have uncovered marriage contracts from the ancient world where it states in there that if the wife is unable to bear children in a certain amount of time after the marriage, she will provide a surrogate for her husband so that her husband can bear children with that surrogate. And that surrogate those children will count as her own children. And that's what Rachel does here. She offers Bilhah, her handmaid, and look what it says. She says, Bilhah will bear a child on my knees. They would literally do this, where the surrogate would sit in the lap of the wife as she gave birth. Kind of like riding a toboggan. If you think about two people on a toboggan, a really strange toboggan ride. You might have the chance later this week to go sledding, and keep that picture in mind while you're out there sledding with your kids. So then she gave him Bilhah, verse 6. Jacob went in to her, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Verse 6 says, Then Rachel said, God has judged my case, and he has also heard my voice and given me a son. And the son would count as Rachel's son. Therefore, she called his name Dan. And Dan means judge, and the idea here is vindication. Vindication. Rachel says, I'm vindicated now because I had a son through Bilhah. Verse 7, And Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, With great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed. And so she called his name Naphtali. Naphtali means my wrestling. Remember when you were a kid asking your parents how they came up with your name? And your parents would say, well, your grandfather was also named Daniel Patrick, and so we named you after your grandfather. Imagine these poor kids in this family. Mom, how did you come up with the name Naphtali? Well, I was in this big fight with my sister, your Aunt Leah, and it was like this wrestling match, and I won. And so you're named Naphtali. Really? It's not like an old family name? No, it's an old family fight. But it was was involving family. My wrestling. Verse 9. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, well, then she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob as well. So now Leah does the same thing. And Leah's maid, Zilpah, bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, a troop comes. So she called his name Gad. The phrase a troop comes means fortune has come my way. And the name Gad means fortune or fortunate. I'm fortunate to have another son. Verse 12. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. And then Leah said, I am happy, for the daughters will call me blessed. So she called his name Asher. Leah is kind of rubbing it in here. I'm happy, and all the daughters are going to call me blessed. And she names her son Happy, Asher.